Hey. You already know who it is. It's your girl DJ Warm Cookies. And if you're hearing my voice, then you've tuned in to another smooth soul shacking session of Why Make Music. Now, before we dive into tonight's groove, a low-end tribute called All About That Bass, let me give out some love. You know we never start off with the shout-outs, so let's go ahead and get it in, get it right. First things first, big love to everyone streaming us across the known universe, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon, wherever you're part of WDMN now. You didn't just stumble into this. No. This is divine rhythm intervention. And we gotta give a massive shout to the think tank itself. My partner in rhyme, my favorite co-conspirator, the man behind the mission, ThinkTimm. Don't forget to follow at ThinkTimm on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Blue Sky, and wherever else brilliant minds gather. He has music out there on all major streaming platforms, from nomenclature, verbal scales, to demotional, chord feelings, to the full instrumental sagas go press play. Let the music speak. And oh yash, shout out to WDMN Damnation. That's the vibe. That's the loop. That's the movement. We making noise. We making music. We making moments. Clap in, lean in, or just nod your head. Whatever your flavor is, we got it on deck. Special love. I mean real warm, soulful love. For all the bass players out there. From the pioneers with fingers of thunder to the new wave funk magicians sliding on six strings or using loop pedals. This one's for you. Whether you're thumping the one, walking a groove, or just staying low and mean. Trust me, we see you, we feel you, we hear you. Now look, you all know we've been knocking these last few episodes out like clockwork. We've been rolling M out in tight time frames, making magic happen with efficiency. But tonight, we're slowing it down, just a little. This one's going long, real long, because we got mad love for the bass, and baby, you can't rush that bottom end. This episode right here, it's a whole groove journey, a buffet of funk, a deep-fried dissertation on the art of the low note. Oh, if you like it short and sweet. Sorry baby, you're gonna have to wait till next week. This time, we're going extra smooth, extra funky, extra long. Alright, you ready? Take a breath, roll that neck, crack the window, let the air hit your skin just right. Because up next is All About That Bass. Hosted by ThinkTimm and Willa May. Sit back, lock in, turn your speakers up, and let the low end lead the way. Welcome to Why Make Music. ...
Hey everybody, welcome to Why Make Music. This is episode 35, and tonight we're going all about that bass. I'm ThinkTimm, your host, a bass player and lifelong lover of the low end. With me is my fantastic co-host, DJ Warm Cookies, also known as Willa May, ready to drop some knowledge and vibes.
You know it. I've got my headphones on and the bass turned way up for this one. Hello, beautiful people. Whether you're a musician or just a music lover, you're in for a treat. Today, we're shining a big spotlight on the electric bass guitar, the unsung hero in so many songs that really makes the music move.
The bass has always been personal for me. Quick story. When I was a kid, I remember hearing the bass line to Queen's "Another One Bites the Dust" vibrating through the floor at a school dance. I didn't know what instrument it was at the time. I just knew it made me feel something new. It was like discovering the heartbeat of music. Fast forward a few years, I picked up a bass guitar and never looked back. Playing those low notes felt like tapping into a power source.
Bass does that. It connects with you physically. It's the instrument that you feel as much as hear. And it's often the glue holding everything together. even if it's not always in the spotlight.
Exactly. And today, we are putting it in the spotlight. We'll talk about the pioneers of the electric bass, the slap bass revolutionaries, the funk rock fusion masters, modern experimental wizards, and some amazing women in bass who paved their own grooves. We've got legendary names from Larry Graham to Thundercat, from Carol Kay to Esperanza Spalding, and so many more. Plus, stick around for some personal anecdotes. I've got one about seeing Meshell Ndegeocello perform live in Philly that I can't wait to share.
We're also going to get into gear a bit, those signature bass guitars, pedals, and sounds that helped define these players, and ultimately wrap up with why the bass still matters in music today, as if it was ever in doubt.
I'm excited. Let's kick it off by rewinding to where it all began for the electric bass guitar. Cue a little vintage bass groove in the background. Maybe a walking bass line from a 50s jazz track.
Pioneers of the electric bass. The electric bass guitar itself was invented in the 1950s. Leo Fender's precision bass came in 1951 and changed everything. But it really took visionary players in the 60s and 70s to show what this new instrument could do. Let's talk pioneers of the electric bass, the trailblazers who made the bass guitar a force in music. We're talking names like James Jamerson, Larry Graham, Bootsy Collins, Stanley Clarke, and a certain fretless phenom we'll mention too. These folks wrote the vocabulary of bass that everyone else builds on. James Jamerson. In the early 1960s, James Jamerson was the heartbeat of Motown Records. He was the uncredited bassist on dozens upon dozens of Motown hits. Seriously. The man's resume of #1 songs eclipses even the Beatles and Rolling Stones. If you've grooved to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, The Temptations' My Girl, The Four Tops, Bernadette, or Stevie Wonder's I Was Made to Love Her, you've been grooving to Jamerson's bass lines. Jamerson had a jazz background and brought a melodic, fluid style to R&B that just hadn't been heard before. He played mostly one finger, the famous hook finger, on his right hand, and he rarely, if ever, changed the flat wound strings on his bass. The instrument he used was a stock 1962 Fender Precision bass that he nicknamed the Funk Machine, and its sound was a deep, warm thump, with just enough punch to carry those intricate lines.
Jamerson's lines were just beautiful. They had this dancing quality, full of syncopation and passing tones. He treated bass like a musical voice, not just root notes. Take Bernadette. During the chorus, his bass is practically singing a counter melody beneath the vocals. And yet, he always locked in with the drummer, the Motown Funk Brothers drummer Benny Benjamin or Uriel Jones, to drive the song forward. Story goes, when Marvin Gaye recorded What's Going On, Jamerson laid down that famous bass line while lying on the studio floor, half drunk, because he'd been out gigging and was called into the session late, and he still nailed it in one take. That's raw talent and feel.
And it wasn't just the notes he played, it was the sound. Jamerson kept his Fender Precision's tone controls low, and often stuffed foam under the bridge cover to mute the strings, achieving that signature muted, fat Motown tone. On recordings, it sat in the mix, like a friendly giant, supportive but unmistakable. It's been said Motown producers had to fight to get his bass high enough in the mix. The result was those songs having a warmth and groove that powered the Motown sound. Jamerson truly set the standard for bass as the soul of the rhythm section. Larry Graham, now on the West Coast, and a few years later, Larry Graham comes along and invents an entirely new way to play the bass. That's not an exaggeration. He's universally credited with creating slap and pop technique on electric bass. Larry was the bassist for Sly and the Family Stone, one of the great funk rock soul bands of the late 60s. Songs like Dance to the Music, and thank you for letting me be myself again. Feature this thumping, percussive bass style that nobody had really heard before Larry did it. What happened was, in an earlier band, Larry found himself without a drummer, so he started playing the bass in a way. Pat covered the drum parts, thumping the lower strings with his thumb to emulate a kick drum and popping the higher strings with his fingers to emulate a snare. He later said, I was basically trying to play drums on the bass, and thus slap bass was born, out of necessity and ingenuity.
Picture it. It's the late 60s. You're at a Sly and the Family Stone show, and Larry Graham steps up with his bass. Instead of the usual finger-style walking or grooving, he whacks the string with his thumb. Boom! Then tugs and snaps a string. Pop. It must have been like a rhythmic shockwave. On Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, that rubbery, aggressive groove hitting your chest was like nothing before. Larry's innovation expanded what the bass could do. He made it both a rhythm and a lead instrument simultaneously. He took that style forward with his own band, Graham Central Station, in the 70s, on tracks like Hair and The Jam, which are like textbooks for slap bass players.
And technically, what Larry did was bring an old upright bass trick into the electric era. Jazz and blues upright bassists had been slapping the string against the fingerboard for percussive effect for decades, but nobody applied it to electric bass guitar until Larry came along. Once he did, it opened a floodgate. The tone he got was a very snappy, bright sound. He often played a Fender jazz bass, early on and later a custom moon bass, with a deep bottom and a percussive smack on top. It gave funk music its signature sonic kick. Songs like Thank You and Everyday People, though that one's more conventional, with the bass guitar front and center, in pop music in a whole new way. And let's mention Larry Graham's thumping and fucking inspired basically every slap bassist that followed. From Bootsy to Flea to Marcus Miller, he's rightfully called the godfather of slap bass. Bootsy Collins. Speaking of Bootsy, damn man, Bootsy Collins is a character and a half, and also a titan of funk bass. Bootsy came on the scene at the tail end of the 60s as a teenager playing bass for James Brown, really Bootsy, was only about 18 or 19 when he recorded classics like Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine. In 1970, with James Brown, his style back then was actually pretty straightforward funk, rock solid. James Brown was all about the first beat of the measure, the harmony, and Bootsy delivered that fundamental flip to the floor. But Bootsy's story gets wilder. After a short but significant stint at James Brown, he and his brother Catfish Collins left the band and got scooped up by George Clinton for Parliament Funkadelic. That's where Bootsy's full persona blossomed. He became this sci-fi funk superhero with star-shaped sunglasses and even a star-shaped bass to match. The infamous space bass.
Bootsy's space bass is legendary in itself. A custom-built star-shaped bass guitar covered in crazy colors and lights. But beyond the look, Bootsy brought a feel. He took what Larry Graham did and added a whole lot of psychedelic grease to it. Listen to Parliament's Give Up the Funk, Tear the Roof Off the Sucker, or funkadelic jams like Flashlight. On Flashlight, Bootsy actually played keyboard bass, but he dialed it in to sound like his style. That elastic, booty-shaking groove. He's got this way of playing behind the beat, a lazy funk swagger, and he'll often use effects to make the bass sound almost like a synth or a spaceship taking off. He was one of the first to really push effects pedals for bass. The Mutron 3 envelope filter, giving that wah-like funky quack, was a key part of his sound. He even said, without it, there ain't no Bootsy about that pedal. Fuzz, wah, phasers. He'd use it all to get that trippy funk tone.
And Bootsy's persona, we have to mention it. He wasn't the sideman hiding by the drummer. He was often front and center, shouting out funky slogans, dressed in starry, freaky costumes. He brought a showmanship to bass that was totally new. Yet, for all the flash, his bass fundamentals were tight as anything. Take I'd Rather Be With You by Bootsy's rubber band. It's a slow jam, but the bass carries the whole song, with this gooey, seductive beat. And then he uses a bit of distortion and filter to make it almost talk. Or Bootsy, where he literally uses the bass to converse with that Bootsilla baby, falsetto in tandem. Under George Clinton's mentorship, Bootsy basically solidified funk bass. Heavy on the one, make it fun, make it deep. By the way, Bootsy's famous advice to bass players: keep it on the one. Always come back to that downbeat. James Brown drilled that into him. You ain't on the one, Bootsy, he'd say, when Bootsy got too busy. And Bootsy carried that lesson through his career, even as he got wild and woolly on top of it. Stanley Clarke, now shifting gears in the jazz fusion realm. One pioneer stands tall. Stanley Clarke. Stanley came up in the early 70s and co-founded the seminal fusion movement, Return to Forever with Chick Corea. He's important because he was really the first electric bassist to become a bona fide superstar as a soloist in jazz. I mean, he was headlining shows and selling out venues as a bassist. That was unheard of before. Stanley Clarke's 1976 album, School Days, has a title track which turned into an anthem for bass players. That track starts with Stanley slapping and clapping an alembic bass like it's a lead guitar, and it blew everyone's mind. He showed that bass guitar could be a lead instrument in jazz, and not just a background rhythm section thing.
Stanley's style combined insane technical proficiency with musicality. He could play lightning-fast runs. He has huge hands and could span crazy intervals on the fingerboard, and also bow an upright bass beautifully. On electric, though, he really showcased slap and chordal playing in a jazz context. Listen to School Days or Lopsy Lou. He's thumping out funk on an alembic in one moment, then playing a lyrical melody the next. And he had this alembic short-scale bass that gave him a distinctive tone, very bright and high, almost like a piano in the low end. In fact, Stanley once said he wanted his bass to have the range and clarity of a piano, and those alembic basses, handmade, active electronics, delivered that. He was also the first jazz fusion bassist to really tour like a rock star. By mid-70s, he was headlining his own shows, doing bass solos for big audiences that blazed a trail for folks like Jaco Pastorius and Marcus Miller later, proving audiences would indeed come out just to see a bassist if the music was compelling.
Something I love about Stanley Clarke: he could groove hard when he wanted, as in his work with George Duke. Check out tracks like Reach For It, where Stanley's groove is so deep, in the pocket you can't even see daylight. But he also expanded the bass's role. He'd play lead lines in unison with Chick Corea's keyboards. He'd do unaccompanied bass solos that had fans screaming in Return to Forever live shows. There was always a Stanley solo spot, and he even experimented with piccolo bass, the bass tuned an octave higher, to take solos in the guitar range. He basically said, there's no part of music the bass can't be part of, and historically, he's a giant. The first fusion bassist to have gold records and Grammys, and all that as a band leader. Truly a pioneer. Jaco Pastorius. We can't discuss pioneers without talking about Jaco Pastorius. Even though the prompt didn't list him explicitly, I think everyone would agree Jaco belongs in this pantheon. Jaco came a little after Stanley, mid to late 70s, and he revolutionized the bass in a different way. He was the master of the fretless bass. Jaco pulled the frets out of his Fender jazz bass, famously filling the lines with wood filler and coating it with marine epoxy. And that gave him a singing, sliding tone that was completely fresh in electric music. On top of that, he had ridiculous technique, super fast, precise, and imaginative. He could play chords, do this thing with harmonics, like bell-like tones, by lightly touching the string. Listen to his composition Portrait of Tracy, which is basically a bass harmonics masterpiece. It sounds like droplets of water and chimes, all done on one solo bass. And then he could groove like no other two. His bass line on Weather Report's Teen Town is a sprinting funk jazz clinic.
Jaco called himself the world's greatest bass player. And you know, he kind of backed it up. He had swagger and a rock star attitude, shirtless with long hair, doing flips on stage sometimes, but also the musical depth to live up to the hype. With Weather Report, the premier jazz fusion band of the 70s, Jaco brought the bass up in the mix and into the spotlight. Tracks like Birdland, he's not just underneath, he's doubling melodies, sliding in fills. One of his signature moves was using chorus effect on his fretless bass to give it an even more lush, singing quality, like on his famous solo piece, Continuum. And his groove on Joni Mitchell's Coyote or Herbie Hancock's Stuff. It showed he wasn't just about flashy soloing. He could sit in the groove and lift the whole band. Critics and musicians often say Jaco Pastorius is arguably the most influential electric bassist ever, because after him, everyone approached the instrument with new eyes. He expanded the vocabulary, funk, jazz, R&B, world music. He could do it all on a fretless bass, which in lesser hands can sound out of tune or wobbly. With Jaco, it just sang.
Absolutely. And Jaco's influence is heard in so many who came later, from Marcus Miller and Victor Wooten to rock bassists who might not even realize they're channeling Jaco when they play a certain melodic fill. He set a gold standard for virtuosity and musicality on bass. Sadly, Jaco's life was short and troubled. He passed away in 1987, but in a brief time he took the electric bass to heights people didn't imagine possible. Songs like Teen Town or his work on Hajira with Joni Mitchell remain reference points for what a bass guitar can do. Slap bass innovators.
So after those pioneers laid the foundation, by the late 70s and into the 80s, slap bass became the hot thing. Everyone wanted that funky thumb sound in their music. This era gave rise to some slap bass innovators who took Larry Graham's thump and plug concept and pushed it to new extremes or fused it with other genres. Let's highlight a few. Victor Wooten, Flea, Norwood Fisher, Mark King, among others. Each of these players made the slap technique their own, influencing countless bassists, and frankly, helping sell a lot of thumb-worn bass guitars.
Victor Wooten, where do we start? Victor is often hailed as one of the greatest living bass players. He came to prominence in the late 80s as a founding member of Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, a group that mixes bluegrass, jazz, funk, just about everything. Victor is a 5-time Grammy Award winner, and he's basically a virtuoso who treats the bass like a full-range solo instrument. Victor, an innovator in slap, is his development of the double thump technique. Traditional slap involves hitting the string with your thumb downstroke. Victor popularized the idea of also doing an upstroke with the thumb on the way back, effectively using the thumb like a pick, going down, dash up, dash down, dash up. It allowed him to play incredibly fast, seamless lines that mix slapped notes and popped notes at blur speed. If you want your jaw dropped, watch a video of Victor Wooten's following. He'll slap, pop, tap with his other fingers on the fretboard, like a pianist on the neck. He even use the bass's harmonics for melody. Yet, crucially, he grooves hard. One of his famous pieces is "You can't hold no groove if you ain't got no pocket." That title says it all. No matter how fancy you get, the groove comes first. And Victor's groove is monstrous. He can hold down a song in 4 quarters and still make it dance. Rolling Stone magazine once listed him among the top 10 bassists of all time, alongside legends from earlier eras. He's also been called the Michael Jordan of the bass. He's that impactful.
I've seen Victor live a couple of times, and each time I basically spend half the show shaking my head in disbelief and the other half grinning ear to ear. He'll do things like play a heartfelt, slide-filled rendition of Amazing Grace on bass using harmonics. It sounds like an entire gospel choir humming, then seamlessly break into a dirty funk groove that makes the whole audience shout. And he often does solo bass sets, where he'll use a looper pedal to lay down a slapped beat, then layer chordal comping, then solo over it, all on bass. It's one of those experiences that redefines what you thought a bass could do. Importantly, Victor is also a teacher and thinker about music. He wrote a book called The Music Lesson. He emphasizes feeling and listening as much as technique. So even though he's a slap monster, he always reminds people, groove and musicality first.
Now, Flea real name Michael Balzari of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. If you grew up on 80s, 90s rock, Flea's slap bass was unavoidable in the best way. Flea was heavily influenced by Bootsy Collins and Larry Graham, as well as punk rock energy. Red Hot Chili Peppers started out as a wild funk punk band, and Flea's bass was basically the lead instrument many times, because the guitarist Hillel Slovak and then John Frusciante often played more textural or riffy stuff while Flea was going off on these popping funk lines. Give it away, that bass line is pure slap swagger, an incessant pop and slap riff that drives the whole song. Or their cover of Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground. Flea slapping all over that with a super aggressive attack. Really digging in, his approach was often to slap almost every note of a line, as opposed to intermixing slap and fingerstyle, when he wanted that percussive effect. But here's the thing, Flea can also be incredibly melodic, and choose not to slap. By the time the Chili Peppers did, Under the Bridge or Californication, he mostly stuck to fingerstyle and showed his range. Still, slap is a huge part of his toolkit and identity. He often used Music Man Stingray basses early on, which gave him that bright, zingy tone. ND later a modulus bass with graphite neck, and currently often a jazz bass. But regardless of the bass, when Flea slaps, you know it's Flea. There's an urgency and attack that matches his on-stage persona. The man basically bounces around like he's on a trampoline while playing.
One of my favorite Flea moments is the song Aeroplane. The main groove is a plucked, funky line, but in the bridge, Flea breaks into a slap bass solo that's both funky and kind of beautiful. He uses the slap technique to create a syncopated, almost Latin percussion vibe before sliding back into the groove. And live, man, Flea would throw in slap fills even where they weren't on the studio record. It's like he can't resist, because that's part of how he expresses himself. Another track, Stone Cold Bush, from Mother's Milk album, is Slap Insanity, a flurry of notes, very fast and gritty. But importantly, Flea's slap always served Red Hot Chili Peppers songs, which mix funk and rock. He wasn't doing it to show off. Okay, maybe a little in the early days. He was doing it because that fiery slap sound was the Chili Peppers' attitude. Funky, rebellious, a bit chaotic, but totally infectious. Norwood Fisher. Let's give some love to a perhaps lesser known but utterly badass slapper. John Norwood Fisher from the band Fishbone. If you don't know Fishbone, they're a legendary Los Angeles band formed in the late 70s, early 80s that blends funk, punk, ska, and rock. Real high-energy, eclectic stuff. Norwood's bass often had to hold together all those changing styles and manic arrangements. And boy, did he. He's known in the bass community as a powerhouse of slap and fingerstyle. One moment he's popping a funk line, the next he's walking a ska bass line, next he's doubling a metal riff, all in one song. Check out Fishbone's Bonin' in the Boneyard. Norwood kicks that off with a gnarly slap fast solo lick. It's hyper frenetic thumb slapping and popping, really announcing the bass is here. Then the groove comes in, and he keeps slapping these wild lines that interplay with horn hits and guitar. It's a workout. In fact, a Guitar World article noted that Norwood's hyperactive thumb and inventive bass lines should have made him as big a name as Flea or Les Claypool. He was that good. Fishbone never got quite the mainstream breakthrough, but among musicians, Norwood is hugely respected.
Norwood learned to slap young. There's a story he tells about seeing someone slap in a music store when he was a teenager, and it blew his mind. He went home and basically reverse engineered what he saw until he could do it. You can hear influences of Larry Graham in his thumb technique, and Flea was actually coming up around the same time in the same city. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were aware of each other. Norwood often plays with a very punchy tone. I recall he's used Music Man and Warwick basses, 5 strings sometimes, to get both the deep reggish lows and the bright slap tone. He's the kind of player who, if you see Fishbone live, will drop your jaw. He might not be as famous as some others we're talking about, but any bassist who mixes genres like that, while slapping like a monster, deserves the innovator tag. He effectively showed how slap could work in punk and ska contexts, not just straight funk. Songs like Everyday Sunshine have him doing a simpler groove, but then on stage he'd embellish with pops. And let's just say, if there were an Olympic event for stamina in slap bass, Norwood could contend. Their music is fast and he's slapping at crazy tempos. Mark King, jumping over to the UK. We have Mark King from Level 42, a slap bass pioneer on the pop charts. Mark King is often called Thumb Thumbs, a nickname he earned just like Louis Johnson. Of the brothers Johnson did because of his blistering slap technique in the 1980s, while a lot of slap was in funk and R&B. Mark brought it into a jazz funk pop context with Level 42. He was not only the bassist, but also the lead vocalist of the band. So here's a guy slapping these incredibly fast, complex lines while singing. That's like rubbing your belly, patting your head, and reciting poetry. At the same time, not easy. Listen to Level 42 songs like Love Games, Sun Goes Down, Living It Up, or their big hit Lessons in Love. The bass is front and center, snapping and popping in tight sync with the drums, essentially acting as both rhythm and a bit of melody. One track, beloved by bass players, is Mr. Pink. There's a live version where Mark King's slap bass solo intro is just insane, a flurry of 16th notes that are clean, musical, and superhumanly fast. It almost sounds like someone programmed a drum machine with bass notes, but nope, it's Mark's 2 hands.
What set Mark King apart was how clean and precise his slap is, even at ridiculous speed. Part of his secret was using very light gauge strings, like .30 to .90 gauge, which are almost floppy, and a bright scooped tone. Plus, he wore his bass high on his chest, which gave him more control. He often used boutique UK basses, in early days a JD bass, later a Status graphite bass. Those gave him a very bright and even tone. He also used a bit of chorus or reverb occasionally to thicken the sound, and he would often slap chords or double stops, not just single notes. which made his parts sound very full. A fun fact, he was originally a drummer, which he credits for his approach on bass. He basically applied drum rudiments to thumb and finger combinations, so his bass lines sometimes feel like a drum pattern in terms of rhythm, very percussive and structured, but they carry harmony too. As a singer, he kept his bass lines busy, but rhythmic enough that he could kind of sing around them. It's mind-boggling to me. If you try karaokeing the Level 42 song and air-slapping the bass line at the same time, you realize how much skill that takes. Mark King's success, Level 42 had multiple hits and world tours, brought slap bass to a mainstream pop audience. Suddenly, kids in the 80s who heard Lessons in Love on the radio were humming a bass line without even knowing it.
Right, and Mark's style is distinct from the American funk slappers because it has that English pop sensibility. It's very upbeat, almost cheerful funk. He showed that slap bass could be melodic and pop-friendly. To this day, he's still revered. Bass magazines always include him in the Slap Hall of Fame. And get this, even today, in his 60s, he can still pull off those crazy lines live and sing. He's a machine, or maybe an alien, in the best way. Funk, rock, and fusion players.
Now, not every great bass moment comes from slap, or even from being a pioneer. Sometimes it's about groove, taste, and blending into genres in just the right way. Let's talk about some bass giants in funk, rock, and fusion, who might not all be known for flashy technique, but are known for legendary grooves and contributions. Marcus Miller, Verdine White, Bernard Edwards, Geddy Lee, John Paul Jones, etc. These are players who each have a distinct fingerprint on the music world, whether through unforgettable bass lines, songwriting, or signature tone.
Marcus Miller, the man is a groove factory. Marcus came on the scene in the late 70s, and by the 80s, he was everywhere in the studio world. He's a multi-instrumentalist, but bass is his primary axe. Marcus is known for his work with Miles Davis. He was Miles' bassist and producer on Tutu and Amandla albums. With Luther Vandross, he played those catchy R&B bass lines on hits like Never Too Much and countless others, from Michael Jackson to Chaka Khan. As a solo artist, Marcus has a ton of jazz funk albums. Signature-wise, Marcus Miller is often associated with a 1977 Fender jazz bass, natural ash body, maple neck, which he hot-rodded with a preamp. That bass sound is crystal clear and punchy. When Marcus slaps, yes, he's a slap master too. It's like a gunshot, followed by a piano's clarity. So clean and snappy. Check out Run for Cover, one of his famous solo tunes, with power. His thumb is like a drumstick, super precise. But Marcus isn't all slap. He has a smooth, fingerstyle groove. For example, his bass line on Luther Vandross's Never Too Much is fingerstyle. Busy but perfectly pocket. And it absolutely carries that song. Seriously, that line is the song's hook in a way. He can lay down deep groove in funk and then turn around and play lyrical jazz solos. With a fretless yes, he sometimes plays fretless too, and even bass clarinet, but that's another story.
Marcus Miller also has that composer/arranger brain. He's often the producer in sessions, so he has a knack for knowing when the bass should step up or step back. When he worked with Miles Davis, he wasn't just playing bass, he was crafting the whole vibe. The title track, Tutu, is basically Marcus's composition, where the bass sets the moody tone and even plays the main riff. One of my favorite Marcus grooves is Detroit, from his album Silver Rain. It's fingerstyle, but with such a bounce that it almost feels like slap. He's ghost noting and grooving so hard. Also, fun fact, Marcus often employs double thumb and pluck, like Wooten style, in his slap to get 16th note rolls, but he does it in service of taste, not just to show off. And the dude's won Grammy Awards, is in the Jazz Hall of Fame, etc. He's world class, a testament to his versatility. He's played with jazz legends, R&B divas, pop icons, and always fits right in. Marcus Miller personifies the modern funk/fusion bassist who can do it all. Verdine White. If you've ever danced to an Earth, Wind & Fire song, you've danced to Verdine's bass. Verdine White is Earth, Wind & Fire's bassist and one of its founding members. And yes, brother of the late Maurice White. He has a distinct style that's smooth, buoyant, and joyful, much like his onstage persona. He's that slender guy with long, flowing hair you've seen in all the Earth, Wind & Fire performance videos, absolutely smiling and grooving every second. Verdine's bass playing might not be as showy as some others we've discussed, but it's fundamental to some of the greatest funk, soul, and disco tracks of all time. Songs like September, Let's Groove, Boogie Wonderland, Shining Star, all driven by Verdine's solid lines. What's interesting is Verdine was classically trained on upright bass as a young man, and he brought a certain finesse to electric bass because of that. He took lessons from Louis Satterfield, a Chess Records session bassist, and combined that with a love of funk. The result? Lines that are melodic and bouncy. For example, in September, he's not just hitting root notes, he's doing melodic runs that interplay with the horn lines, but you almost don't notice because they fit so well. In Shining Star, he famously doubled the guitar riff in parts, adding a fatness to it. And live, Verdine would take an occasional solo where he'd show off some fast runs and bluesy licks. Check out some live EWF from the 70s. Verdine could shred a bit when allowed, but mostly, he focuses on groove. I recall him saying in an interview that he realized the song was king, and he didn't worry about the bass being complex for its own sake. It served the song melodically and hold down the groove. Also worth noting, Verdine White's stage energy is infectious. He's often hopping around, dancing in sync with the other band members, all while never missing a beat on bass. That showmanship, combined with tight musicianship, helped Earth, Wind & Fire become one of the biggest bands ever. Gear-wise, Verdine has used a Fender jazz bass for a lot of his career. He even has a signature model now. The jazz bass, with its smoother attack and a bit of scoop in tone, helped his notes blend. Perfect for a big band with horns, guitars, and vocals all in the mix. He also often plucks over the fretboard, a little trick to get a softer, rounder tone. If you ever solo his bass lines, some isolated tracks are out there, you realize he was doing some walking bass techniques under EWF's funk, likely that jazz influence. And those sneak up on you bass lines, like in Serpentine Fire, where he's pumping 8 notes and then throws in a quick fill, are just tasty. Verdine White exemplifies the bass player as the unsung hero, not flashy like a flop soloist, but absolutely integral to the band's sound and feel.
Bernard Edwards. Now here's a name every bassist speaks with reverence. Bernard was the bassist and co-founder of the band Sheep, and along with guitarist Nile Rodgers, he wrote and produced a string of late 70s hits that basically defined disco funk elegance. If you've ever grooved to Good Times, Le Freak, Everybody Dance, or Sister Sledges by Our Family, that bass you're grooving to. That's Bernard Edwards. His style is the epitome of tasteful funk. He didn't slap. In fact, he stuck to fingerstyle with a very cool, muted tone. But he played some of the funkiest bass lines ever recorded. The Good Times bass line is historic. Not only is it a killer groove on its own, it became the DNA of hip-hop. Sugar Hill Gang sampled it in Rapper's Delight, and even influenced rock. John Deacon of Queen admitted he was inspired by Good Times. When writing, another one bites the dust. Bernard's touch was smooth. He often slightly muted the strings, with his left hand to get a short, warm pulse on each note. And his note choices were perfect. He'd often outline the chord, and then throw in a little melodic skip, or walk that just makes the groove. Listen to Chic Cheer or My Forbidden Lover. Fantastic bass work that never overplays.
Bernard Edwards had a signature move too. He'd sometimes do this chucking technique in unison with Niall's guitar, a kind of percussive muted strumming on the bass to create a chic-a-chick rhythm. You hear a bit of that on Le Freak during the breakdown. It basically turned his bass into a rhythm guitar for a bar or two, adding incredible rhythmic drive. Gear-wise, Bernard started on a Fender Precision in Chick's early days, 77 era, but soon switched to a Music Man Stingray around 1978. The Stingray, with its active electronics, gave him a round, beefy tone that still had clarity. You can hear the difference. The Risque album, 1979, which has Good Times, has a really thick low end, which is likely that Stingray. He kept his tone dialed pretty flat and warm, not a lot of treble. And here's the cool part. He wasn't about flashy technique. It was his time feel that was impeccable. The placement of his notes was always in that pocket where it feels like the groove is effortlessly rolling. He had this laid-back yet driving feel, a paradox that only masters achieve. If you isolate Good Times, the way he plays is so relaxed. He's not rushing, he's just fat and on it. That's what makes you want to move. Sadly, Bernard Edwards passed away young in 1996 at 43, but he left an immortal legacy. His bass lines are required learning for funk bassists, and as a producer, he and Niall produced for Diana Ross, Sister Sledge, etc. He knew how to craft rhythm sections that served the song, but were also incredibly hooky on their own. In short, Bernard's bass was the good time.
Shifting to rock, let's talk Geddy Lee from Rush. Geddy is a prog rock icon, known for his high-pitched vocals, keyboard playing, and wicked bass skills, often all at the same time. In a power trio like Rush, the bass has a lot of room and responsibility, and Geddy filled that space with inventive lines that became integral to Rush's sound. Early on, Geddy was very influenced by Jack Bruce Cream and Chris Squire, yes, meaning he wasn't content to just play simple backing. He made the bass a lead voice alongside the guitar. Take YYZ, an instrumental by Geddy's bass riffs carry as much melodic weight as Alex Lifeson's guitar, or Red Barchetta, where during the guitar solo, Geddy's bass is doing a counter melody rather than just root notes. One of his standout moments is the bass solo in Free Will. He unleashes a flurry of notes up and down, the neck in a very melodic way, and it's all while the band is in complex 13/8 timing. Geddy often played with a bright, grinding tone, thanks in part to using a Rickenbacker for 001 bass in the 70s. But Rick had a crisp attack, and he'd run it through powerful amps, sometimes splitting the signal to get both low end and a distorted top end. He later switched predominantly to Fender jazz basses, which he said gave him a bit more low end heft, but he dialed in the tone on those two still have that aggressive edge. In the 80s, for songs like Tom Sawyer, he even played synth bass for deep drones, while plucking bass guitar, talk about multitasking. And live performances, he'd trigger keyboard bass pedals with his feet, while singing and playing bass. There's practically a joke among Rush fans that Geddy Lee has 3 brains to do all that.
Musically, what I love about Geddy is that he found the sweet spot between technical and tasteful. Rush's music often has odd time signatures and rapid changes, so he had to be technically strong. But he also has a killer sense of melody. A lot of Rush songs have the bass as a hook. The The bass intro of Spirit of Radio, that jazzy walking bit into rock riff, that's Geddy. The growling opening of Roundabout, oh wait, that's Yes, Chris Squire. But funnily, Rush often got compared to Yes in their early days. Geddy's tone and approach in the 70s definitely had Squire's influence. Squire also used a Rickenbacker and had that piano wire sharpness. However, Geddy made it his own, especially as he embraced the jazz bass. By Moving Pictures era, Geddy's lines like in Limelight or Vital Signs are groovy, even reggae-tinged at times, but still uniquely Rush. Plus, he anchored a lot of Rush's sound, since Alex Lifeson, guitarist, often used chorusy, spacious guitar tones. Geddy would provide the low end and rhythm, effectively part bass, part second guitar. One of the ultimate showcases is La Via Strangiato, an instrumental where Geddy navigates through rock, funk, and swing sections, sometimes doubling guitar lines with astonishing precision. And did I mention he sings like an air raid siren on top of it? That still baffles me. Geddy Lee proved that rock bass could be complex and prominent without sacrificing the power trio punch. A lot of rock bassists cite him as the guy who made them realize the bass could be as interesting as the lead guitar.
On the subject of rock bass, we must mention John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. Now, Zeppelin's often lauded for Robert Plant's vocals, Jimmy Page's guitars, John Bonham's drumming, but John Paul Jones was the secret glue and a phenomenal musician in his own right. He played keyboards and arranged songs also, but let's focus on his bass. JPJ, as he's affectionately called, had a more supportive role in Zeppelin compared to someone like Geddy in Rush, but his bass lines are incredibly musical. For instance, Ramble On. During the verses, he plays this beautiful melodic line that walks up and down, outlining the guitar chords, adding a light, almost folksy bounce. It's not just root notes, it's a counterpoint to Plant's vocals and Page's acoustic guitar. Then in the chorus, he locks in with one, with a more driving groove, or the Lemon Song, where he basically does a blues bass solo throughout the song. He's improvising around the blues scale the whole time, and it's brilliant. He even throws in a bit of Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor riff. Good times, bad times. The very first track of Zeppelin's debut has JPJ doing rapid-fire triplets on bass behind the chorus, a technique he achieved with fast three-finger plucking. That was flashy for 1969 rock, and it kind of announced this band has a bassist who's got chops.
John Paul Jones often used a Fender Jazz bass. A 1962 Jazz was his main axe in the early years. That gave him a warm, round tone that could punch when needed. He wasn't about distortion or extreme brightness. He often sat just below the guitar in frequency, holding down the fort. A perfect example of his supportive genius is Stairway to Heaven. People rarely talk about the bass in that song because there's so much else. But when the drums and bass come in, JPJ plays a lovely moving line that adds weight without overpowering the delicate guitar and vocals. It's exactly what the song needs at each moment. Another is Black Dog. The riff is famous, but note when the band stops and starts, JPJ always comes in a fraction of a second behind Page's guitar riff, giving it that swagger. Whether intentional or just feel, it's so clear because it makes the groove sound greasy and heavy. And live, because Zeppelin was just one guitar, JPJ often had to fill space. He'd sometimes use an 8-string bass or effect to thicken the sound, or play keyboard bass on songs like No Quarter, while foot pedaling the actual bass notes. He even had a custom triple neck instrument at one point, one neck being an 8-string bass, to pull off some live arrangements. DJ Warm Cookies. Importantly, John Paul Jones came from a session musician background. He arranged and played on pop records before Zepp, so he brought a lot of versatility. He could throw in funk, listen to the grunge, Zeppelin's James Brown-esque funk jam. JPJ's bass is super syncopated and playful there. He could do folk and country vibes. Bron Y.R. Stomp has him on fretless acoustic bass guitar. He even dabbled in using a fretless electric later, but primarily he's revered for rock-solid lines that groove hard. You can absolutely nod your head to Zeppelin, thanks largely to him and Bonham locking in, and yet are musically interesting. Many a hard rock bassist learned that you can be creative because of JPJ, not by soloing, but by writing bass parts that stand as memorable in their own right. If you hum the riffs of Ramble On or Good Times, Bad Times, you're humming bass lines. That's legacy. Modern and experimental bassists. As music headed into the 2000s and 2010s, bass playing continued to evolve. New genres, new technologies, and new musical philosophies gave rise to a crop of modern and experimental bassists who are doing really exciting things. Let's highlight 4: Thundercat, MonoNeon, Michael League, and Jamareo Artis. They each represent a different aspect of today's bass landscape, from futuristic funk jazz fusion to genre-blending world music to straight-up modern pop funk.
Thundercat's real name, Stephen Bruner, is one of the most celebrated bassists of the last decade. If Larry Graham and Jaco Pastorius had a child in a cosmic jazz nebula, well, that child might be Thundercat, the funkiest cat in modern times. He's known for his solo albums, like Drunk and It Is What It Is, where he sings and plays bass, and for his collaborations with artists like Flying Lotus and Kendrick Lamar. Style-wise, Thundercat plays a 6-string bass, often a hollow body Ibanez custom, which gives him extended range to play chords and high melodies, and boy does he use that range. One moment he's holding down a funky R&B groove, the next he's shredding lightning-fast jazz fusion lines, or soloing like a lead guitarist, all on bass. His sound is very distinct. He often uses effects like chorus, wah, and reverb to create almost an electric keyboard or synth feel from the bass. Take his popular track Unchanges. The bass line, which slyly is built on a sample of the Isley Brothers' Footsteps in the Dark Drums, is a chunky, soulful riff that drives the song and also acts as a hook. He sings over it in a laid-back high voice. Then, on other tracks like an instrumental, he unleashes virtuosic runs that are lightning fast but still somehow groovy and cheeky. That track is under 3 minutes and basically melts your face with bass. Also, notably, Thundercat's bass playing on Kendrick Lamar's These Walls and other cuts on To Pimp a Butterfly helped bring live jazz funk bass into modern hip-hop in a big way. Kendrick's album won a Grammy and a Pulitzer, and Thundercat's fingerprints, or should I say fingerplucks, are on a lot of its sound.
Thundercat's technique is formidable. He does rapid-fire 16th note riffs with ease, aided by that 6-string and his use of both thumb and fingers. Not traditional slap, more like a flamenco guitarist at times. But he's also got deep groove. You can hear the influence of people like Stanley Clarke in his playing, but also someone like Pino Palladino, who played a lot of R&B bass. Thundercat has mentioned loving J Dilla beats, and he kind of humanizes that swung feel on bass. He's a huge anime fan, and that quirky, colorful personality comes out in his music. It's adventurous. Some songs will suddenly shift tempo or style, and the bass often leads those changes. Thundercat has made young audiences pay attention to bass again. You'll find teenagers who might not know Jaco, but they know Thundercat, and are impressed that a bass player can be a frontman and shredder. It's done a lot for the instrument's cool factor in the modern era. Plus, seeing him live is something. He'll be up there with just a drummer and keyboardist sometimes, and yet fill the sonic space fully, because his 6-string bass covers bass lines, chords, and melodies as needed. It's a far cry from the just stand in the back traditional bass role.
MonoNeon, government name Dwayne Eric Thomas Jr. Talk about unique. MonoNeon is an experimental funk bassist, known as much for his eccentric style, both musically and fashion-wise. As for his deep groove, he was actually the last bassist to work with Prince. Prince caught on to his viral videos and invited him to Paisley Park, which tells you Prince recognized his talent. MonoNeon often plays a left-handed bass, strung upside down. He's lefty, but leaves the strings in righty order, meaning he's effectively playing the low string with his bottom fingers. A very unusual setup. This contributes to his peculiar sound. He might finger pluck the high strings with his thumb and index in a way others don't. His sound is heavy, dirty, funk, with a twist of the avant-garde flair for icing on the cake. You'll hear him lay down a super greasy, old-school groove, reminiscent of the Stax Records, Memphis Soul. Fitting, since he's from Memphis. But then he'll throw in outside dissonant notes or crazy slides that add a quirky flavor. A track like Hot Cheetos. Yes, he has a song by that name. Shows his wild side. But then he has jams on albums with Ghost Note, a funk jam band spin-off of Snarky Puppy. Here, he's just in the pocket, nasty. MonoNeon also became famous for those social media videos where he'd improvise bass lines to random YouTube clips like people speaking in funny voices or viral videos. He'd match the tonal inflections with bass notes. That's a whole new level of ear training and creativity, basically turning speech into music on the fly. It's weird, hilarious, and musically brilliant all at once.
MonoNeon's gear and tone often involve flat-wound strings for a thumpy sound, and he'll put like a sock or cloth by the bridge to dampen the sustain, old-school trick, but then pump that through effects, like octave pedals, fuzz, and filters, to get these wobbling, almost synth-like bass tones. In essence, he merges the vintage and the modern, and the dude's chops are serious. Listen to the song Smoke Break with Snow Allegra that MonoNeon played on. The groove is so tight and swaggering. Or his contributions on Mac Miller's last album. MonoNeon can be very tasteful when needed, but he really shines in free-form, funky improvisation. Seeing him live, he might hold down a P-Funk style groove for a while, then suddenly you hear these microtonal slides or a flurry of pops. He keeps you on your toes. He's showing a new generation that funk can be experimental, and that out-there art can still groove hard. And again, Prince's endorsement of him speaks volumes. Prince had an ear for great bassists, and MonoNeon joining that lineage, including Larry Graham, Louis Johnson, Rhonda Smith, etc., is a big nod.
Michael League, you might not immediately think bass hero with Michael, because he's more known as a band leader, composer, but that in itself is significant. Michael League is the founder of Snarky Puppy, the Grammy-winning ensemble that marries jazz, funk, and world music. In Snarky Puppy, Michael plays bass and is the primary composer, arranger. So he's often in the background on stage, usually sitting on a stool grooving with a baseball cap on, while the rotating cast of soloists do their thing. But don't underestimate his playing. He is a groove specialist. Snarky Puppy's music can be complex, but the bass lines are always tasty, often deep in the pocket, and with a cool, understated funkiness. Check out Snarky's track, Shafakin. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. The bass line is a repetitive groove that anchors the tune through all its dynamic shifts. It's not flashy, but if you took it away, the whole track would lose its glue. In What About Me, he uses a rolling bass line that drives the odd meter groove with authority. Michael's tone is usually warm and supportive. I believe he often uses a 5-string electric bass. He has used Fodera and Fender, and now has some custom ones, with maybe a bit of tube-amp grit for presence. He's not slapping or soloing or snarky poppy. He's the one making sure that 10 musicians stay grounded. And given Snarky Puppy's success, they've won multiple Grammys. Had viral live-in studio performance at Lingus, featuring Corey Henry on keys. Michael League has proven that a bassist can be the mastermind behind a large, popular musical project.
Beyond Snarky, Michael League has branched out. He started a music label, Ground Up Music, to promote other genre-blending artists, and even formed a world music supergroup called Bocante, where he actually plays baritone guitar more. But on bass, I think of him as a modern heir to the tradition of great musical directors who play bass, like Marcus Miller did for Luther Miles, or Paul McCartney in the Beatles context even. He's always serving the song. A great example of his less is more prowess, Snarky Puppy's Deep. It's basically a slow 6/8 groove. Michael sits on these simple fat bass notes that just ooze soul and let the other instruments fly. He could play 10 notes, but he chooses 1 or 2, and it works. Also, because Snarky Puppy blends styles, Michael's very adept at switching tone feel. 1 minute laying a straight funk line, next minute doing a reggae dub bass, next doing Afrobeat style repetitive groove. It's subtle sometimes, but he's absorbing and reflecting a lot of traditions. In doing so, he's inspiring many young bassists to be musicians first, to learn theory, arrangement, and not just licks. I'd say he's a modern role model for the bassists who want to run a full show in a good way.
Finally, let's highlight Jamareo Artis, a name that might not be as widely known as Thundercat, but tens of millions have heard him play. Why? He was the bassist for Bruno Mars, and is the one laying down that juicy bass line on Uptown Funk, one of the biggest hit songs of the 2010s. Jamareo represents the bridge between classic funk, R&B bass, and modern pop. He grew up on old school funk. He cites people like Verdine White, Larry Graham, etc. as influences, and it shows in his playing with Bruno's band, the Hooligans, before hooking up with Bruno Mars. Jamareo actually won P. Diddy's MTV show, making his band in 2009, which is kind of like a reality competition, where musicians audition to be in a band that gave him some exposure, and not long after, he landed the Bruno Mars gig as a young guy. Talk about a rocket launch by his early 20s. He's playing the Super Bowl halftime show, Bruno's 2014 halftime performance. That funky band up there, that was Jamareo on bass and touring the world.
His playing style is deeply rooted in funk and R&B tradition, but presented in a slick pop context. On Uptown Funk, the recorded bass line is actually a synth bass, doubled by Jamareo's actual bass, and he appears in the music video prominently grooving with that line. It's a line straight out of the early 80s funk playbook. You could easily imagine it on a Prince or Gap Band record, and Jamareo brings the feel to make it convincing. Another great example is Bruno Mars's Treasure. That song is an obvious homage to 70s disco funk. Sounds like Chic meets MJ, and the bass line pops and grooves just right. Jamareo nails that classic vibe. When he plays D on stage, he's bouncing, doing choreography, and keeping the pocket tight. He often plays a Fender jazz bass or a Music Man. I've seen him with both, getting a nice punchy tone that works for the retro vibe. He's not overly busy, like a true funk bassist. He finds a solid line, and finish it tastefully on turnarounds or in-person jams. And he definitely knows how to give the one, always accenting that downbeat to lock in the audience's body.
What I admire is that Jamareo has helped reintroduce real bass playing to mainstream pop audiences. In an era when so much pop and dance music uses programmed synth bass, Bruno Mars having a live band with a bassist like Jamareo really stands out. It brings that human feel that makes people dance differently. It's the old Motown, Stax, Prince, live band magic in a modern pop show, and clearly it works. I mean, Uptown Funk spent 14 weeks at number 1 and was absolutely ubiquitous. That bass line in the verses so catchy, you hum it. Also, credit to Jamareo and Bruno's band. They put on a show. Jamareo would do those classic moves, you know, in unison with the band, stepping and sliding. A bit of the times influence there, while funking out. He's basically living the legacy of folks like Jamerson and Louis Johnson in the pop world today. After years of maybe bass being less visible in pop, the fact that a huge star like Bruno insisted on that funky bass presence is a big deal. Jamareo Artis, through a platform like that, has inspired a lot of young players, especially African American kids, seeing someone who looks like them in a mega pop band, to pick up the bass and learn what those grooves are about, and that ensures the bass tradition keeps going strong.
Female bass player spotlight. We've talked about a lot of bass legends so far, but I want to make sure we shine a special spotlight on the female bass players who have made monumental contributions to music. The bass world, like much of the music industry, was historically male-dominated, but these women broke through that and carved out their own legacy. Let's celebrate Carol Kay, Tina Weymouth, Meshell Ndegeocello, Esperanza Spalding, Nik West, Ida Nielsen, and we could name others too. Shout out to Tal Wilkenfeld, Gail Ann Dorsey, Rhonda Smith, Kim Deal, the list goes on. Each of these women not only held their own, they're giants in their genres.
Carol Kay, you might not recognize her face. You have absolutely heard her play. Carol Kay is often called the First Lady of Bass. She was a top session bassist and guitarist in Los Angeles in the 1960s, part of the famous Wrecking Crew group of studio musicians. She's credited with playing on an estimated 10,000 recordings, which is mind-blowing, to put that in today's terms. Her work spans from the Beach Boys to Frank Sinatra to Simon and Garfunkel, the Motown tracks cut in LA. Yes, she played on some Motown sessions when they'd do West Coast recordings. Some iconic bass lines of hers: the Mission Impossible TV theme, that cool driving bass riff, that's Carol. Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. She played electric bass, along with an upright bassist, to create that rich bass part. Sonny and Cher's The Beat Goes On, Joe Cocker's Feelin' Alright, Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman. She famously came up with a bass intro on the spot. Nancy Sinatra's These Boots Are Made for Walking, and many more, all power. She often played with a pick plectrum on a Fender Precision bass, which gave her a bright, punchy sound that producers loved because it defined the notes clearly on AM radio. You'll also notice on many tracks she used damped picking, often with foam mutes, to get that tight 60s bass sound. Carol's feel was solid. She could swing, she could rock, she could groove, whatever the job required. And all this in an era when it was almost entirely men in the studio. She has spoken about how sometimes the guys would be skeptical when she walked in, but by the end of the date, her playing did the talking and earned respect.
Carol Kay is a pioneer, not just as a woman in a male field, but as a bassist who helped define the sound of recorded music in the 60s. The California sound of the Beach Boys owes a lot to her bass lines. She had jazz chops too. Early in her career, she gigged in jazz clubs, which gave her the improvisational skill to come up with creative lines quickly in the studio. One famous anecdote: on The Beat Goes On, the producer wanted something more from the bass, so Carol improvised that descending line that anchors the song. It's simple, but so effective, and that was her genius: musical simplicity. Another one, she played on Homeward Bound by Simon and Garfunkel, a beautiful, subtle bass part. She knew when to sit back and when to shine. Carol also wrote bass instructional books starting in the late 60s, sharing her knowledge with countless students. So she wasn't just in the background, she actively shaped bass education too. Today, when you hear isolated Wrecking Crew recordings, some have circulated, her precision and consistency are unreal. Remember, this is pre-digital, often one or two takes, and she's locking in like a machine with soul. Carol Kay's legacy is basically the bass player on everything. It's awesome that in recent years she's gotten more public recognition, documentaries, interviews, because for a long time session, players were unsung. She's in her late 80s now and still short, giving interviews, correcting folks on her credits on internet forums. Don't go to her bad side. Legend.
Tina Weymouth, founding bassist of Talking Heads and later Tom Tom Club, Tina brought a whole different vibe. In the late 70s, arty, minimalist, and super groovy in a new wave kind of way, she essentially taught herself bass to join Talking Heads. David Byrne and Chris France were her boyfriend and husband, and friend at the time, and wanted her in the band, so she picked up bass. What she might have lacked in traditional technique early on, she made up for with creative feel. Tina's bass lines are often deceptively simple, but they're absolutely infectious, and serve the quirky songs perfectly. Psycho Killer, check that bass. It's basically an eighth note pulse with little walk-ups. Very sparse, very tight. It leaves space and gives the song its nervous energy. Once in a lifetime famous song, the bass is mostly pedaling one note in a hypnotic rhythm, with a little octave jump here and there. That trance-fi groove is the anchor while all the weird stuff happens above. Tina understood the power of repetition and space. As she said, she wasn't into being flashy. She'd rather play one note that felt really good than a flurry that doesn't. Her style often had a reggae and funk influence, but filtered through a cool, downtown, New York art rock lens. And it cuts. Her tone had enough mid-range that you can hum her lines. Also, being one of the few prominent women in that CBGB punk new wave scene playing bass, she inspired many future musicians. Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, for example, cited Tina as an influence.
Gear-wise, Tina Weymouth often played short-scale basses. She's known for using a Hofner Club bass, a hollow-body short scale, kind of like Paul McCartney's Hofner violin bass but a different shape, and also used Fender Mustang bass and a Fender Music Master bass early on. These shorter-scale basses have a plunky, thumpy tone and are physically easier to handle if you're smaller, which suited Tina. She said the Hofner's lightweight and smaller size helped her perform freely. That contributed to her distinctive sound, tight and not a ton of sustain, which was perfect for those staccato lines. Production-wise, Brian Eno worked on some Talking Heads records, and the minimalism of her bass against the complex percussion and keyboards was a deliberate artistic choice. It's fascinating. When others were doing more notes, she did less, and it stood out more. And in Tom Tom Club, the side project she did with Chris France, You hear her in a more playful, funky mode. Genius of Love has a fun, bouncy bass line. That song itself became a heavily sampled track in hip-hop. Tina's playing was absolutely central to Talking Heads' identity. The rhythm section in that band was the secret sauce in making their oddball songs into hits you could dance to. If you listen to Talking Heads' 77, their first album, up through Remain in Light, you can literally hear Tina growing more confident and funky each album. By the time of Burning Down the House, she's grooving hard. She embraced simple grooves wholeheartedly, saying a lot with a little. A great example, Stop Making Sense live album. Listen to Slippery People or Life During Wartime. She's locked in, and it's fire. Many post-punk and alternative bassists cite Tina Weymouth as an influence because she showed that bass and rock could be danceable and bold without being technically over the top. She really is a legend in that regard.
Meshell Ndegeocello, talk about a multi-dimensional artist. Meshell emerged in the early 1990s and was arguably the first prominent black female bassist singer-songwriter to break big since the 70s. I'm thinking of Amina Claudine Myers in jazz maybe, but in mainstream music, Meshell was unique. Her music spans funk, soul, hip-hop, rock, jazz. It's hard to classify, which is exactly how she likes it. As a bassist, Meshell Ndegeocello has feel for days. She can sit in a groove and make it simple, or explode as needed. Her bass lines can be minimalist, dub 1 minute and slippery funk the next, and then she might pick up a pick and give punky edge on another tune. Check her album Plantation Lullabies, 1993. It announced her as a serious groove artist. The song, If That's Your Boyfriend, He Wasn't Last Night, has a fat, syncopated bass line that drives the neo-soul hip-hop vibe of the track. It's funky, but not in a cliched way. It's like James Brown meets hip-hop meets sultry R&B. Then she can flip script on Peace Beyond Passion, 1996. She covers Bill Withers' Who Is He and What Is He to You? With a laid-back, almost reggae feel. Her bass line is super sparse, but dripping with attitude. She also did a whole record in tribute to Nina Simone, where her upright and electric bass work is so emotive. Meshell often plays a Fender Jazz 4 or 5 string, and sometimes a Music Man Stingray, through warm-sounding amps. They give her a deep, round tone. She's known to favor the bridge pickup a bit, for a tighter sound when doing funk finger style, and she also not hesitate to use a fuzz pedal or envelope filter for effect when a song calls, for that dirty funk or psychedelic vibe.
Meshell's riff. So the bass isn't an afterthought, it's often the DNA of the song. On Earth, a track from her album Bitter, she basically uses the bass almost like a guitar to strum chords that set this hypnotic folk soul mood. On the flip side, in Pocketbook, Feet, Missy Elliott, you hear her pumping out a mean low riff that could be straight from a go-go or hip-hop track. As a session bassist, Meshell has popped up on some cool projects too, e.g. she played on Alanis Morissette's So Unsexy and the Rolling Stones' Saint of Me in the 90s, and brought her distinctive groove to those. And how about this? She appeared in that documentary, Standing in the Shadows of Motown, singing and playing James Jamerson's lines. Imagine, Jamerson inspired her, and years later she's paying homage to him on film. Full circle. Meshell has earned 10 Grammy nominations over her career, which shows the respect she has in the industry. She's fearless in shifting styles. She might release an album that's pure funk, then another that's very introspective acoustic soul, then another that's experimental or political. Through it all, her bass is like this grounding voice, and her stage performances, magic. She often reinterprets her songs on stage, but no matter how she arranges them, the groove is deep. She can make a whole venue sway with a single bass line repeating like a mantra. Trust me, I'll get into a personal anecdote about seeing her on stage in Philly a bit later. It was almost a spiritual experience for me. Meshell's playing reminds us that groove and expression, top clash any day. It's all about honesty in the music with her.
Esperanza Spalding, if there's a modern jazz rock star, or perhaps jazz star bassist, Esperanza is it. She's a prodigy who exploded onto the scene in the late 2000s, releasing albums where she sings and plays upright and electric bass. In 2011, she did the unthinkable. Won the Grammy for Best New Artist, the first jazz artist ever to do so, beating out the likes of Justin Bieber and Drake. It was a real signal that musicianship and artistry can still get mainstream recognition. Esperanza primarily is known for her jazz double bass playing, but she also plays electric, often a fretless Fender Jazz or similar, and has some serious funk chops when she wants. Her music spans jazz, Brazilian, soul, often all mixed together. On her album Radio Music Society, check out Black Gold. She lays down a funky electric bass groove while singing empowering lyrics. On earlier records like Esperanza, there's I Know You Know, where she's plucking a lively upright bass line and scatting along with it in unison. A virtuosic move, reminiscent of classic jazzers, but given a fresh spin by her. Her upright playing is phenomenally good. She was a professor at Berklee College of Music in her 20s, because she's that proficient. But focusing on electric, she often uses a fretless bass to get a rich, warm tone that complements her vocal nicely. For example, in some live performances of Overjoyed, Stevie Wonder cover, she plays a fretless electric and sings. Her intonation and groove are spot on. Esperanza's also not afraid to plug in and get funky. She's performed with acts like Herbie Hancock, and she can throw down a Jaco-influenced electric solo if the moment calls. Another dimension, she's a composer who's done wild conceptual projects, like an opera and an experimental album, where she created an alter ego Emily. Yet, in all these, the bass underpins everything.
When Esperanza plays, it's often jaw-dropping to see her, much like it was with Jaco or Stanley for folks back in the day. Because she'll be singing these complex melodies while her fingers are doing something completely different on the bass, often in tricky time signatures or rapid lines. It's a coordination feat of the highest order. And the thing is, her stage presence is so joyful and natural that she makes it look easy, all while wearing a huge afro and a bright smile. She became sort of an icon for making jazz cool and relevant to younger audiences. Her accolades include multiple Grammys, I think she's up to 5 now, and she's collaborated with legends. Prince invited her to jam at Paisley Park too, showing how much respect she commanded. Esperanza's electric bass technique is interesting in that she brings some upright phrasing to it, like she might slide into notes like on the fretless, or she might keep her lines more legato. But she can also slap a little or get percussive when needed. There's a tune, Funk the Fear, where she thumps a bit. She's truly versatile. Perhaps one of her coolest electric bass moments is in Cinnamon Tree. The studio version is upright, but I saw a live clip where she played it on electric. She held down this neo-soul and improvised little fills between her vocal lines, almost like call and response with herself. It was masterful. Esperanza Spalding has broadened the image of who a bass hero can be. She's a young Afro-Latina woman who conquered jazz and stepped beyond it. For many girls and boys, see, it's hugely inspiring. And she's still early in her career, so who knows what boundary she'll break next.
Nik West, now he is a ball of energy and funk in the modern era. Nik West is often immediately recognized by her look, She sports a flamboyant, colourful mohawk, shaped like a bass clef cymbal, no less, and high-fashion stage outfits. But as soon as she starts playing, any notion that she's just about image goes out the window. She pummels the bass with slap and funk grooves that prove she's got the substance to match the style. She's about the same generation as me, came up in the 2010s making waves, on YouTube and through collaborations. Nik West counts Prince as one of her big admirers. She jammed with him, and he praised her stage presence and musicianship. She's also worked with people like Dave Stewart, Eurythmics, and even had a cameo on the TV show Glee as bassist. Her style is heavily influenced by Larry Graham, Louis Johnson, and Marcus Miller. Essentially, she's a disciple of the slap funk tradition. If you watch her covers or her original tracks, you'll see thumb slaps, pops, double thumbs, slides, all the tricks, but used in service of very fun, danceable music. Tracked like Purple Unicorn. Fitting title, she's kind of like a funky unicorn on stage. Has her thumping out a catchy riff and singing in a soulful belt. Or her cover of a CDC's Back in Black. She transforms that rock riff into a slap bass extravaganza, and it works shockingly well.
She often plays a Fender Jazz or a Warwick, and she's even had signature gear, like a Nik West Fender bass amp head with her neon colors on it. Her tone is bright and punchy, great for slap, but she can dial it back for R&B slow jams too. She's definitely a show woman in the mold of Bootsy or Larry, meaning she'll pull out choreographed moves, interactive call and response with the audience, and just generally put on a spectacle. I think that's fantastic because it brings that element of entertainment to bass playing, which historically has often been a backline thing. Nik West steps out front. Also, being a young black woman in rock funk, she challenges stereotypes in multiple ways, and she's very outspoken about empowering others to play. She's done bass clinics and camps aimed at young players, especially girls, to get them involved in music. Musically, one of my favorite Nik West moments is her bass-off video with the Bootsy Collins on YouTube. She holds her own trading funk licks with Bootsy, all while wearing some crazy outfit and heels. It just looked like the torch being passed. Bootsy even gave her a shout. "She inspires me," he said. "You can't get a better endorsement in funk than that." So yeah, Nik West merges the classic funk tradition with a modern flair, and she's helping ensure the bass is seen as well as heard in today's music scene.
Ida Nielsen, to round out our female spotlight. Here's another modern funk queen. Ida Nielsen is from Denmark and might be best known for being one of Prince's bass players. During his final years, around 2010 to 2016, she was part of Prince's all-female band, Third Eye Girl, along with guitarist Donna Grantis and drummer Hannah Welton, as well as his larger new Power Generation band. If Prince chooses you to hold down the low end, that's a serious seal of approval, and Ida delivered. On tracks like Prince's Breakfast Can Wait, or live gems like Stratus, a cover they often did, Ida lays down funky, crisp lines with a flavor that's somewhere between old school and new. She's great at classic slap. There's a live video of her funking out a slap solo during a Prince medley. She's popping octaves and thumping quick pentatonic licks like it's nothing. But she also plays fingerstyle funk beautifully. Tight 16th note grooves and melodic fills. After Prince's passing, Ida's been releasing her own music, and it's pure funk celebration. Songs like Showtime or Tank Girl show her popping, grooving, and even rapping a bit. She clearly carries on Prince's ethos of real musicianship meets fun.
Ida Nielsen often plays a 5-string bass. I recall she has a signature Sandberg bass, a beautiful funky-looking 5-string, and she also has used MTD basses. Her tone is very punchy with a nice top-end snap. You need that if you're slapping and want to cut through, especially in Prince's dense mixes with horns, keys, etc. One hallmark of her playing with Prince was discipline. Prince was known to be a taskmaster. He wanted the groove exact. Ida could sit on a one-bar funk groove and make it feel hypnotic. Listen to Prince's live versions of Cool or You Got the Look from the early 2000s. Ida is just nailing the synth bass lines on electric bass, super steady, and Prince is free to wail or dance on top because that foundation is rock solid. Yet she can also step out. Prince often gave his bassists a spotlight solo segment in concerts because he loved bass. And in some shows, Ida would do a slap solo where she'd interpolate famous funk riffs. A bit of "Thank you for letting me be myself again." Here, a bit of "Another one bites the dust there," etc. And the crowd would eat it up. She has a playful approach in those moments. Being from Scandinavia, she might not have grown up in funk's birthplace, but she clearly studied the greats intensely, and Prince evidently sensed that funk in her. Off stage, Ida's got a quiet, humble vibe, but put a bass in her hands and some funky Dr. Martens boots on her feet, and she'll groove ferociously. I admire that she continues to fly the funk flag globally. Her albums are a reminder that funk is an international language now. She also often mentions how Prince taught her to always keep it about the feel and the audience, not about showing off. Good lesson for all bassists and musicians in general. Personal anecdotes. Meshell in Philly, 1993. So, I want to share a personal story that really encapsulates why I love the bass so much, and it involves one of the players we just talked about, Meshell Ndegeocello. I call this story Meshell in Philly. It was years ago in Philadelphia. Meshell was doing an intimate show at a venue called Chestnut St. Cabaret. Great acoustics in that place. Even I, WQ's a huge fan. I got there by mistake. Eric and I were just on walkabout that day, doing nothing, and snagged a table maybe 10 feet from the stage. The setup was simple and easy. She had a drummer, 2 keyboardists, a guitarist, and Meshell herself on electric bass and vocals. When she walked out, she had this quiet, humble air. No flashy outfit, just her bass, a worn Fender jazz bass, strapped on. She greeted the crowd softly, and then, boom, she hit the first note. It was a low E, or maybe D, I'm not sure if she was detuning. And it just vibrated the room in the most warm, enveloping way. She rolled right into a deep groove. Here's the thing. This was different. Meshell's groove grabbed you by the soul. I realized after a few minutes that something was unique. Meshell never once took off her bass that entire show. She played bass on every song, continuously, almost like an extension of her body. She never put it down. In some concerts, singers might set the instrument aside for a ballad or something, but not her. She was singing, yes, but the bass was leading the night. She played songs from plantation lullabies, funky jams to mellow, folky tunes. At one point, she did her rendition of, she played the bass line from Let's Work. The groove on that was so thick, it wasn't loud or aggressive, it was just fat. Meshell stood mostly still, eyes closed, just swaying a bit, but her fingers were dancing on the fretboard. She would lock into these deceptively simple bass riffs, and then subtly vary them. A little slide here, a skipped beat there, the kind of nuances that make a groove really live and breathe. I found myself not just hearing it, but feeling it, like the whole crowd was riding this gentle wave together. During one particularly soulful song, Shootin' Up and Gettin' High, which became this spacious, almost dub-like piece, she had this moment. The drummer and keys were laying way back, sparse, and Meshell was just pulsing single bass notes. And then she played this fill, maybe 5 or 6 notes walking up, so quietly, yet it was was like the entire room's air changed for a second. I get chills recalling it. It was that perfect fill you'd put in a textbook on taste. A few of us in the audience who were obviously musicians just gasped or hollered, "Yeah," spontaneously. Meshell cracked a little smile at that. She heard us hear her, if that makes sense. It felt like a conversation, with her bass doing the talking and our reactions answering. And that's something special about small shows with masters like her. It's intimate, almost communal. Between songs, she was actually pretty shy. She'd nod or say a brief "thank you" when people cheered, but no long banter. It's like her expressiveness comes out through the instrument more than words. She also performed Outside Your Door, one of her more well-known tunes, and an emotionally heavy one. For that, she switched to a picked style, using a pick on her bass to get a harsher, more driving tone. And it was like a heart ripping open. You could feel the hurt in every note of that bass line. Honestly, I was near tears. It was that powerful. The crowd was dead silent during the quiet parts. You could hear the proverbial pin drop. And it was the bass and her voice carrying this profound vulnerability. I remember walking out of that venue feeling almost high. My homie Eric, microphone mover 101, and I just kept repeating, "That groove, that groove." I've seen technically flashier bassists, sure, but Meshell gave me something else. A reminder that the bass, at its core, is about connection. It's the connector between rhythm and melody, between the stage and the audience, between one note and the next. That night in Philly, Meshell Ndegeocello turned a simple club gig into a soul-sharing experience, using her bass as the conduit. I'll never forget it. In fact, the next day, I practiced my bass with a new kind of intentionality, focusing on making one note feel as good as possible. That's the Meshell effect.
Gear, pedals, and signature sounds. Alright, let's geek out a little on something every bassist loves to jaw about: gear and tone. We've been dropping hints about famous bass models and pedals throughout the episode, but this section is for tying it all together. How the sounds we associate with these players are achieved, and how gear influenced the evolution of bass playing. It's not just for tech's sake. It's actually a big part of why bass shifted styles over the years. So let's talk about some iconic bass guitars, amplifiers, and effects, and how different players forged their signature sounds with them.
Basses, the actual instrument, is the first factor in sound. Perhaps the two most iconic electric basses are the Fender Precision Bass P-Bass and the Fender Jazz Bass J-Bass. Early pioneers like James Jamerson used a Precision. A P-Bass has a split coil pickup, giving it a punchy, warm tone with strong low-mid presence. Jamerson's 1962 P-Bass, the Funk Machine, had flat wound strings and very high action. That, combined with the P-Bass tone, gave him that deep thump you hear on Motown records. He reportedly never changed his strings. He'd say the gunk in them was the funk, which made the tone even more dead and thumpy. Great for the mix in those days. Carol Kay also used a Precision with a pick, which yielded that clear attack on the record she did. So the P-Bass basically wrote the book on foundational bass tone. If you want that classic sit-in-the-mix bass that can thump or punch a bit when you dig in, a P is it. The jazz bass, introduced by Fender in 1960, has two pickups and a slimmer neck. Players like Jaco Pastorius, Geddy Lee, Marcus Miller gravitated to jazz basses because of the versatility. You can solo the bridge pickup for a honky burp. Jaco did that to get his singing fretless tone. Or both pickups on full for a scooped, bright slap tone. Marcus's signature slap sound is a 77 jazz bass with both pickups on and an active preamp boosting lows and highs. Geddy Lee used a jazz in later years because he said it had more bottom end than his Rickenbacker and just felt more fluid to play. A jazz bass with round wound strings has a certain growl. Think of Geddy's isolated bass in YYZ or Jaco's in Teen Town. There's a mid-range bark that cuts through. That's the jazz bass talking. Marcus Miller's jazz, with a Sadowski preamp originally, and now his own line of basses, can get an ultra-sizzle slap tone or a fat finger style. He often slightly favors the rear pickup for slap to get clarity. Now, outside of Fender, a huge one is the Music Man Stingray, designed by Leo Fender in the 70s after he left Fender. It's got a single humbucker pickup and active EQ. That active circuit was a game changer. Suddenly, you could boost lows, highs on the bass itself. Louis Johnson slaps on a Stingray, like on Brothers Johnson tracks or Michael Jackson's Off the Wall album, had this bright, aggressive snap with solid bottom. That's the Stingray sound. Bernard Edwards used a Stingray extensively, that rich, chic tone on Good Times. That's a Stingray with probably a bit of bass boost, giving it that round but clear sound. Flea famously used a Stingray on early RHCP albums like Blood Sugar Sex Magic for songs like Give It Away. That grinding, in-your-face tone, especially with Flea's aggressive slap approach, is Stingray all the way. Stingrays tend to have a lot of zing and a very even response. Great for funk and rock where the bass needs to be felt and heard. On the flip side, Rickenbacker 4001/4003 basses, Chris Squire, Geddy Lee, 70s, Paul McCartney on some later Beatles, have their own vibe. A trebly, almost guitar-like clang when played with a pick, and a piano-like ring when played fingerstyle. Squire ran his Ricken stereo, pickup output separated, to get an insane tone on Yes Records, one channel super trebly, one bassy. Geddy used a Rick in Rush's early days to cut through the heavy guitars. A Rick sound can be heard on something like Yes's Roundabout, all that metallic grind, or Rush's Red Barchetta. It's gritty, but defined. Not many mentioned here besides Geddy used Ricks, but it's a signature sound worth noting in rock. And then Alembic and other high-end boutique basses. Alembic for Stanley Clarke, Fodera for Victor Wooten, Ken Smith for many gospel funk players, etc. Alembic was one of the first with active electronics and multi-pickup configs. Stanley's Alembic gave him that hi-fi tone for school days. Clear top, solid bottom, almost no traditional Fender muddiness. That allowed him to solo like a lead. Every note rang out. Victor Wooten's main bass is a Fodera Monarch, nicknamed Yin Yang for its paint job. That bass has dual pickups, 24 frets, and is built for extended techniques. He can do 2-octave tapping and chordal stuff on it easily. A lot of modern virtuosos use boutique 5 or 6 string basses, like John Patitucci with his 6-string Yamaha, because they need the range and clarity for complex music. Thundercat's Ibanez 6-string is semi-hollow, giving him a bit of warmth and woodiness, even as he shreds, which matches his blend of electronic and organic sound. Now, amplification and effects. This is huge in crafting a signature sound. Early on, most bassists just plugged into big tube amps, like Ampeg B15s in studio, or SVTs live, which give a natural warm compression and a bit of grit when pushed. Jamerson used an Ampeg B15 flip top in the Motown studio. That contributed to that round sound we hear. John Paul Jones and John Entwistle in the 70s started using Sun and acoustic amps that could be very loud and bright. Entwistle actually used guitar amps too to get distortion. But pedals, that's where unique sounds really come in. For instance, we mentioned Bootsy Collins and the Mutron 3 envelope filter. An envelope filter, aka auto-wah, basically makes that waka waka funk tone following your note's dynamics. Bootsy made it his trademark. Hear Parliament's Sir Nose devoid of funk, or Bootsy's own, the name is Bootsy, baby. The bass going bow with each note. That's envelope filter funk. Almost every funk bassist after used some form of that for flavor. Flea hits an envelope filter on Sir Psycho Sexy for a moment, for example. Distortion, fuzz. Chris Squire and Lemmy used overdrive to practically make their bass a rhythm guitar. More recently, players like Muse's Chris Wolstenholme use heavy fuzz plus synth pedal, to make huge sounds. Check Hysteria or Time is Running Out. Sounds like a synth, but it's bass with fuzz and octave. Cliff Burton of Metallica ran a fuzz-wah combo for his lead parts, so distortion is key in rock metal bass for a grinding tone. Geddy Lee started running a Sansamp preamp in the 90s to emulate his old overdriven amp sound in a controlled way, thus maintaining that growl even as he switched to cleaner jazz basses. Compression. Not a flashy effect, but almost everyone uses it, especially for slap and funk, to even out volume spikes and add punch. Marcus Miller uses compression heavily. It's part of why his slapped notes pop so uniformly and his sustain is controlled. In the studio, Jamerson's tone got a lot of compression too. That made his soft, thumpy notes audible in the mix. Chorus. Popular in 80s, Jaco used a little on Continuum. Peter Hook of New Order used it to get his dreamy melodic tone. Duff McKagan of Guns N' Roses used chorus on Sweet Child of Mine intro for a subtle effect. Chorus can give bass a thicker, shimmery sound. Esperanza Spalding sometimes has a slight chorus effect on her fretless to accentuate the singing quality, akin to Jaco's style. Octave pedals. These generate a note an octave below what you play. They became big in the funk and pop world. Early example, the Boss OC2 pedal was beloved. Prince actually often had an OC2 on his bassists. Listen to some live Prince jams. The bass suddenly sounds super subby. That's an octave pedal doubling the low note. Pino Palladino, famous session bassist, used an octave on Paul Young's Every Time You Go Away to get that synthy bass tone in the 80s. MonoNeon and modern players use octavers to get crazy subharmonics or even octave up effects for solos. Tremolo, delay, looping, etc. More niche, but players like Michael Manring have done wild stuff with delay loops, and Victor Wooten often uses a looper to layer bass lines live. Also, the strings used in setup matter. We mentioned Jamerson's flats. Flats are warm but thud. Rounds are bright but can be noisy. Most slap funk guys prefer round wounds for the brightness. Larry Graham actually used flats on Sly's early stuff, but by Graham Central Station he was on rounds for more zing. Jaco used round wounds on a fretless, which eats the fretboard but gave him that moi sustain. Many rock players use round wounds. Roto Sound swing bass strings were a popular choice. Entwistle helped develop them. They have a piano-like ring, which Geddy also used. Setup-wise, lower action allows faster play but can buzz, sometimes desirable for grind, a la Jaco or Geddy. Higher action gives you more dynamic range. Jamerson had super high action. You had to dig in, which also meant when he plucked hard it didn't buzz but gave a big tone. So when you hear a signature sound, it's the sum of a lot of choices. The bass model, the electronics, the amp, any pedals, the strings, and the player's hands. Like, no one sounds like Jaco even on his bass, because his hands did a lot. But having that fretless jazz with bridge pickup on in chorus was part of it. No one will quite replicate Lemmy's tone without a Rickenbacker into a Marshall at full blast. But also, his crazy aggressive pick attack was key.
One cool example of gear influence, When Doves Cry by Prince famously, has no bass line in it, radical move. Why? Prince reportedly tried bass on it, and it sounded too normal, so he took it out. But on tour, guess what? He had bassists play a line live to fill it out. The absence on record ironically highlights how much bass contributes normally.
And how about styles influencing gear? When slap bass got huge, bass manufacturers responded with things like built-in preamps, graphite necks, modulus, status, to get snappier tone. 5-string basses so you could play those low, funky synth bass notes. Low B became more common in 80s and 90s for that reason. Thank you, Anthony Jackson, for pioneering 6-string with low B. In modern experimental music, someone like Thundercat will use pedals almost like a guitarist. He'll have fuzz, wah, and even whammy effects to make his bass sound otherworldly. MonoNeon will intentionally use lo-fi sounds or detune to get microtones. There are also MIDI pickups now that let bass trigger synths. Some use that for huge EDM drops, but that's another rabbit hole. At the end of the day, while gear shapes tone, it's still the player. Give 10 bassists the same precision bass, and you'll get 10 sounds. Carol Kay with a pick, Jamerson with the hook finger, and a modern funk player with slap, all on a P, will still be very different. The gear is the palette of colors, and the bassists are the painters. Our pioneers chose the gear they had, and then made it sing. Modern players have a massive menu of sounds to choose from. It's exciting. There's never been a more versatile time for bass tone. From vintage thump to futuristic synth, bassists can do it all now. And trust me, we love fiddling with it. Sometimes too much. I'll admit I've spent an afternoon lost in tweaking pedal settings. But it's all in pursuit of that perfect groove tone that feels right.
And when you hear an unmistakable tone, like that first popping thump of Larry Graham, or the spacey wobble of Bootsy, or the fretless glide of Pino or Jaco, you realize how much the sound itself hooks you, not just the notes. It's part of the signature. I think of it this way. The bass is like the voice of the music's body. Changing the bass's tone is like changing the singer's timbre and pitch. We've grown to love certain bass voices, and as tech evolved, bassists got to develop their own distinct voices more and more. In summary, P-Bass gave us foundational fatness, Jamerson K. J-Bass opened up versatile voices, Jaco, Geddy, Marcus, active basses like Stingray and Alembic, provided clarity and punch for Funk, Bernard, Louis, Jay, Stanley, and effects pedals allowed funk rock astronauts, Bootsy, Flea, modern guys to go to the sonic stratosphere. But no matter what the tools, the end goal was to serve the music, make people feel that rhythm or emotion. The gear is cool, but it's all about what you do with it.
Couldn't have said it better. One fun, quick example. You've heard that Seinfeld slap bass theme? That sound, believe it or not, wasn't even a real bass. It was a synth bass guitar patch, because the composer wanted a very specific compressed slap tone. It's almost cliche bass, pop, pop, wah riffs. That's like the sound of bass reaching even sitcom culture. It shows how identifiable certain gear-influenced sounds, in this case a very 80s slap tone with heavy compression and chorus, have become in pop culture. We can laugh at it, but also celebrate that bass sounds are iconic. Like the moment you hear a wah bass, you think 70s funk. You hear a fretless slide, you think deep ballad or fusion. You hear a pick on rounds with distortion, you think hard rock or post-punk. It's a language of tone that parallels the language of notes. Alright, I think we've gotten nicely deep in the gear weeds, hopefully in an enjoyable way. Let's step back out and wrap this baby up with why all this, the players, the stories, the gear, the grooves, really matters.
We've traveled through decades, genres, and heard from a pantheon of bass legends tonight. It begs a question. After all this time, as future technology changes and music trends come and go, why does the bass still matter so much? I think the answer has been woven through every story and groove you've shared. Bass matters because it's the heartbeat. It's the subtle and sometimes not so subtle force that makes music feel alive. Whether it's Carol Kay in the 60s providing the pulse of the song behind the scenes, or Thundercat in the 2020s, taking the bass to outer space and back. The bass is often what moves you, even if you don't realize it.
Absolutely. You might not always single out the bass when you listen. A lot of casual listeners focus on vocals or guitar or the beat. But remove the bass and something vital goes missing. That Motown track loses its soul without Jamerson's fluid line. That rock anthem loses its guts without the bass holding down the fort. That funk jam loses its funk, quite literally, without the bass groove. The bass is both foundational and transformational. Foundational because it supports the harmony and locks with the drums, and transformational because a clever bass line can redefine a song's character. Think of how Under Pressure's bass line is basically the whole identity of the song. You hum that before any lyric.
And the role of the bass has grown. Today's music is very bass-driven in production. 808s bass drops in hip-hop sub-bass in EDM productions. It's all about that low-end impact. It's funny, even when it's not a bass guitar. The concept of the bass, that low, rhythmic, melodic element, is crucial. Producers spend hours getting the bass right in a mix because they know that's what can make people physically respond to a track. Our ears hear melody and words, but our bodies feel bass. The famous quote, "If you're listening to a band and you suddenly find your body moving, you can thank the bass player," holds true.
We also have a new generation of bassists pushing boundaries, as we discussed. That means the bass is not static. It's an evolving instrument, adapting to new styles. It's equally at home in a dusty blues bar, or a high-tech DJ's rig, or a virtuoso jazz quartet, or a pop stadium tour. And why? Because everything in music benefits from a good foundation and a great groove. The tools might change. Synth bass, 5-string, heck, maybe in the future some AI-generated bass accompaniments. But the role and need for bass won't go away. What's especially cool is seeing bassists step forward as band leaders and composers. Esperanza Spalding, Michael League, Stephen Bruner, aka Thundercat, etc. The bass, traditionally seen as a background instrument, is front and center in many modern creative projects. It shows that thinking from the bass perspective can lead to really innovative music. A bassist often thinks both rhythmically and harmonically, which is a great mindset for composition.
On a human level, I think bass matters because it teaches us cooperation and listening. You can't be a good bassist without ears. You're constantly monitoring the drums, locking in the kick drum pattern, adjusting dynamics, and also the melody, harmony, making sure your note choices support the chords and don't clash. Bassists often are the unsung heroes balancing the band. It cultivates a certain humility and awareness. Many of the folks we talked about, sure, some had ego, how Jaco called himself the greatest, but a lot, especially the ones like Jamerson, Carol Kay, etc., were all about service to the song. That ethos is so valuable. In a world of showboating, the bass player often exemplifies the power of serving the greater groove. Also, bass has been a place for inclusivity and breaking barriers. As we saw with our female bassist Spotlight, it's an instrument that welcomes whoever wants to hold it down. It's physically and sonically grounding, perhaps that draws grounded individuals to it, or helps shape them.
For me, on a personal note, bass matters because of what I felt that first time I really heard it, and what I continue to feel every time I lock in with other musicians. It's almost therapeutic. If I'm jamming and I hit that sweet pocket where my bass, the drums, and the rest all click, it's like a runner's high. You transcend thinking and you're just in the music. I suspect every bassist knows that joy. And listeners, even if they don't play, feel that too when the bass and drums are cooking. It's a unifying force. Let's not forget its emotional range either, not just for making people dance. Bass can be haunting. Think of a solitary, upright bass in a ballad, or Pino's fretless singing out a sad melody. The low frequencies resonate with our chest cavity. There's almost a physiological comfort in well-played bass, like a mother's heartbeat to a baby. It's fundamental.
After tonight, I hope if someone wasn't a bass person, they've gained a whole new appreciation. Maybe you'll go back to your favorite songs and find the bass lines, hum along with them, notice what they're doing. Maybe you'll discover, wow, I never realized the bass in that pop song is doing some cool stuff under the hood. And for those already in love with the low end, I bet you are nodding and smiling at a lot of these stories, and maybe even learned something new, or were inspired to check out a player you hadn't before. The bass community, by the way, tends to be super supportive. Bassists love sharing knowledge, probably because of that cooperative spirit. So, if you're thinking of picking up bass, do it. You'll find tons of resources, I'd say, and fellow bass players happy to groove with you, in spirit or literally.
Well said. The bass still matters, because music still needs that glue, and that glue can be artful. Also, in the age of computers, when some might say, oh, I can just program the bass on a keyboard, the nuance a real bassist brings, those slides, that human timing, that tonal variation each note, it's unbeatable. Human rhythm feel is something that quantization can't truly replicate. That's why even producers who use synth bass often either play it by hand or bring in bass guitar to get feel. I've seen hip-hop producers freak out in a good way when a live bassist replayed their synth bass line. It suddenly had this depth and groove they didn't anticipate. So yeah, bass isn't going anywhere. From local jam sessions to the biggest stages, you'll see a bassist head bobbing, fingers or pick or thumb, working those strings, keeping the music grounded and grooving.
And we love them for it. Let's give a little metaphor. If a band is a building, the bass is the cornerstone of the foundation. If the band is a body, the bass is the heartbeat, and the hit that makes you shake what you got. If the band is a painting, the bass might be the undercoat, but all the other colors need to shine and have context. It might not always be obvious, but remove it and everything falls apart or looks flat.
Couldn't agree more. After exploring all about that bass in this episode, one thing stands out to me. Whether it's a flashy slap lick or a single sustained whole note, the effect of a bass part can be profound. It drives emotion and physical response perhaps more directly than any other instrument. That's the magic, and yes, the mystery of the bass, often felt, not explicitly heard. As a bassist myself, I feel really proud to be part of this lineage we talked about. It inspires me to practice, to live up in some small way to the standard these greats set, and mostly to keep the music in my own bands honest and grooving. And as a fan, I'm thrilled for the future. I mean, who knows what the next Jaco or Meshell is going to come up with, or from where. Someone out there is probably woodshedding right now, developing the next evolutionary slap technique or a new tonal approach. And in 5 to 10 years, we'll be talking about them. The bass guitar is only about 70 years old. It's a relatively young instrument. We've seen it do so much, but there's plenty of frontier left.
One last anecdote. I once asked a drummer friend if you could magically be amazing at another instrument overnight, what would it be? And he said, bass without hesitation. I asked why, and he said, because then I'd truly control the groove, both the rhythm and the melody aspects. That stuck with me. The drummer knew the power of the bass.
That's great. Hopefully tonight we've all gotten a sense of that power and the personalities who wield it. This has been one of my favorite episodes to explore, I won't lie. I got to nerd out on heroes and hopefully convey why they matter.
And I had a blast being the funky Greek chorus here. I learned some new things too. Definitely going to revisit some of these tracks with fresh ears. So to all our listeners, thanks for coming on this low-end journey with us. Now go put on your favorite bass-heavy song. Maybe something we mentioned tonight, or something new you discover, and listen actively to that bass. Maybe it's James Jamerson's Buttery runs on What's Going On, or Carol K making good vibrations vibrate, or Stanley Clarke plucking School Days, or Geddy's roaring in YYZ, or MonoNeon just flat out weird funking. Somewhere on YouTube, let the bass speak to you.
And if you play, keep at it. Remember what Bootsy said, keep it on the one and put your stank on it. Each of these legends became great by finding their own voice. You have one too, whether it's in music or whatever you do. Bass teaches us that individuality can thrive within harmony.
I love it. To wrap up formally, you've been listening to Why Make Music, episode 35, all about that bass. I'm DJ Warm Cookies, aka Willa May, sending you much love and good vibes.
All right, that's my philosophical sign-off. And I'm ThinkTimm. Thank you for lending us your ears and time. It's been a groove. Until next time, keep your ears open, your soul tuned, and don't forget, it's all about that bass. About that bass, no treble. Sorry, couldn't resist. Stay groovy, everyone. Peace and be wild. ThinkTimm, if nothing else.